Hey everyone, I am super excited to share today's video with you because today I am going to be talking about what I read for the past couple of months. These are the books that I read in February and March and sorta kinda into April. It's not as much as I would like just because I started school at the very beginning of March, and so really a lot of my reading I got done in February, and then it kind of trickled a little bit into March, and then I really picked back up on it sometime in April. Now it's May and I feel like I'm actually getting through a lot more books, but it was just the beginning of starting school. I was, kind of stressed out, and I just really was devoting a lot of my time and attention to that. I mean, I go to school 40 hours a week, so it's not like a typical college kid's kind of schedule where, I have tons of free time. So I have been super busy with that, and because of that, I haven't been able to dedicate as much time as I would like to reading. But I do have 5 different books here that I want to share with you that I have finished over the past couple of months, and let's just get right on into it. So the first book that I finished was this one. This is called The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. This is a novel set back in, I think kind of like the mid 1800s or early 1800s. It's set in time of slavery in the South, and it is told between 2 different perspectives. The first perspective is of the slave owner, in a sense. She is basically gifted a slave for, I think, one of her birthdays. I don't remember what it was. Here we go, for her 11th birthday. So it's told in the perspective of this girl who was gifted a slave for her birthday at obviously a very young age. And then the other perspective is of the actual slave. It is such a good read. I mean, honestly, I could not recommend this book enough. I, for one, am a huge fan of historical fiction, and this is actually based off of the Grimke sisters, who are very popular feminist, early feminism idols, so that's really cool, and it is sort of like a loosely true-based story, which is really, really interesting. This book is just so empowering, and it's such a page-turner. It is brutal in some parts. I mean, it is about slavery, and unfortunately, the girl who, kind of owns this slave, her mom, who is sort of, the plantation owner, she is an absolutely awful person. You just hate her so much throughout this entire novel. And so it is very brutal, it's very graphic, and there were parts of it that were very, very hard for me to get through. This book actually took me quite a while to finish, not because it's, a huge book or anything, but because mentally it was so hard for me to wrap my mind around some of the things that are in this book, and it just was one of those books that, while I loved to pick it up because it was so good, I also dreaded it at the same time because it was just so challenging to try to get through. It's such an absolutely mind-blowing read. It is written so beautifully. I really enjoyed both perspectives equally as much. It's not like I favored one over the other, which typically when books are told through multiple perspectives, I always have one that's my favorite, which I will get to later. But this one, I enjoyed both of them equally. I just thought that this was such a great book, and if you're interested in, a slavery sort of text or just an historical fiction book, this is great. Even if you're not a huge fan of that genre, I would highly, highly recommend you read this because this is such a page turner. It's so interesting. There's so many different, I don't know, it's funny because I say plot twist, but this is stuff that actually happened, so it's just mind-blowing, and this was definitely a great, great read. Next book that I finished was another one that is a multiple perspective book. This is called I'll Give You the Sun. I always have such a hard time remembering the title of this because it's like not on the front cover, it's on the inside there. And it is by Jandy Nelson. Oh my god. Ugh, I feel like I read so many good books, but this one is just one of those books that will stick with me for such a long time. If you are a fan of young adult contemporary literature, run, don't walk. Run to Barnes & Noble, Target, get onto your Kindle, whatever you want to do, and purchase this because this is such a fantastic read. So this book is told between the perspective of twins, and so we have the sister and we have the brother, and it's sort of like a coming-of-age story a little bit. It switches between timelines, so we have their perspectives when they are really young, like 12 years old, and then as they get older into more of their like high school teen years, you get that perspective as well, and so it kind of flips halfway through the book. At the beginning of this novel, the twins are very much so like this. I mean, they are even referenced as being one in name in the book. They're Noah and Jude with like no spaces in between because they are literally so close. But then when the book switches and we're however many more years into the future, all of a sudden they aren't like talking to each other. They have developed into such different people. There's just like this wall between them. And so the cool thing about that is you get to learn why that wall developed and you know, why they aren't as inseparable as they used to be at one point. And, you know, the different elements there are very interesting and very intriguing to the story because you do want to find out, because the author does such a good job of really making you relate to these characters and really make you love these characters. And so when all of a sudden things kind of go to shit, you're like, well, what happened? And so you get to learn what sort of happened there, and it's just really, really interesting. They both kind of have different like love stories that are in this. Both are drastically different, and this is actually a very good romance that's put into here because it's not that insta love that you get in a lot of YA novels. So you get to read a lot about their emotions, what they're feeling, and I like that you sort of build up this love and this romance with these characters. I think that is so much better than just, you know, two characters instantly falling in love and you're like, how the heck did that happen? So for me, that just intrigues me a lot more. It pulls me more into the story. It allows me to relate more to the characters. And when things go wrong, I feel it more because I actually feel like I've built up with that relationship with them. So this is such a fantastically written book. I'm gonna warn you, there are parts that are very, very sad, but like if you are a fan of, you know, books like Eleanor Park or what are some other, All the Bright Things, you know, those sort of like young adult contemporary novels, I think you will really enjoy this one, and I could not recommend this enough. This is one of my favorites that I read. The next book that I read is probably my least favorite out of the bunch, and it was just because it was different than what I was expecting. This is Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. First of all, I didn't know that this was like a children's story. I should have done more research on this book or have looked more into it, but it is like a lot like Coraline from Neil Gaiman. If you've, you know, or if you're familiar with that one, it is technically a children's story, but you know, it's obviously still kind of like beefy for a kid's book, and I do enjoy it, but comparatively to Coraline, I mean, Coraline to me was such a more interesting storyline. And recently, if you guys watched my past video, I read Stardust from Neil Gaiman, so I kind of went on this kick and I just wanted to read more of his work, and this was just not my type of story. It's, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this, but basically it's about a kid who grows up in a graveyard, so it's sort of a like spin-off on The Jungle Book, but instead of, you know, having the little kid grow up in a jungle with the animals, this kid grows up in a graveyard with ghosts. And so the premise of it is super intriguing, and there were parts of this book that I did like. Overall, the story though for me was just very like meh. It is adventurous. It has a little bit of a mystery tied into it. It is good. It's just not a storyline that super intrigued me. It's not my type of genre. It just wasn't something that I loved, but the writing style and everything is really, really good. And like I said, I think that the overall storyline is interesting. I just had a really hard time getting through this book. This was one of those books that like kind of prolonged my reading experience just because I didn't really care. I got like a quarter of the way through it and I was like, wow, I didn't feel anything for the characters. I had no interest in this. So this was one of those books I just kind of finished to finish. One of the things I do like though is that there are some very, very awesome illustrations in here. So let me just like, you know, kind of flip through here. You guys can see I love, love, love the illustrations. Whoever illustrated this did an absolutely amazing job. I think that the artwork in here is beautiful. But other than that, just not really my type of book. But if you're interested in that kind of storyline, or if maybe you have a kid that you like to read to, this would be a really, really good book for that. For me though, not really my thing. Next, we have a book that completely effed me up. I mean, this book was life-changing. I'm literally like telling all of my friends and my family to go read this. This is one of those books that I think honestly will be in my top 3 for the year. I mean, so far it's my favorite that I think I've read this year. It's hard to say because I love books and I love all different types of books, but this story was just everything I could have asked for and more. And thank you so much. I had one of my subscribers recommend this to me. I would never have picked this up because I haven't seen it at all in my bookstores. I had to order it online if it wasn't for you. So thank you. I mean, I honestly could repay you with my life because I loved this book that much. So what is this absolutely incredible book that I just cannot stop talking about and just obsessing over? It is by Louise O'Neill and it's called Only Ever Yours. This is a story that's set in sort of a future dystopian about girls who are now synthetically or, you know, genetically created in labs and then are put into schools. They are called Eves and they're trained basically just to be wives and to be bargained off to men, and it is sort of like a feminist criticism book. So if that's not your thing, I mean, I still think it's a great read and it might change your mind a little bit, but just keep that in mind when you are reading this. And for me, I think that that's why this book touched me so much. I am definitely what I would consider a feminist. I mean, I know that especially right now there are so many feminists that I don't think really understand what feminism is, and I think that they portray it in a really awful light. But for me, feminism is just about equality and not putting myself above a man, but definitely not putting a man above myself. And so this book really hits on a lot of points in our current society of how we just have such a disregard for women and how we just are so awful to our entire gender, and how even women ourselves, how we are just so degrading to one another. And it's so interesting because there's things in here and there's things that the author writes about, and it's supposed to be, you know, like I said, this future dystopian awful world, but so many things parallel what we already have in our society, which is really scary. And when you read this, if you decide to pick this up, I highly encourage you to look for those because they're not exactly hidden. But if you just go into this knowing that it is sort of like a feminism critique and that it, you know, like I said, does have a lot of those elements, I think that you will get so much more out of this book because it's just mind-blowing. The things that are in here that, like I said, just parallel so much to our current society. And so this book basically just follows one character as she goes through the school. She is about to approach her graduation date where all of the, you know, eligible bachelors or men come in, and then they just kind of decide to pick a girl that they want. And in this society, there are three kind of castes for women in a sense. So you have the companions who end up being the wives, you have the concubines who are exactly what they sound like, and then you have the chastities, which are the people kind of like the teachers of the school who, you know, kind of like vow to never have sex or relations with a man, or, you know, kind of think like a Catholic nun. That's sort of what it reminded me of. And the scary thing with that is that if you don't end up fitting into one of those, you get sent underground, which means you literally get tested on. You are like a human experiment for the male engineers who, like I said, genetically modify these women to be absolutely perfect. And of course, if you don't fit in one of these groups, or if you decide to break the rules, you have the chance of dying, of them actually killing you, because this is just so hardcore. But it's just so incredible, you know, the different instances and the different things that this main character has to go through, which I'm like, yes, you know, I can relate to that. Overall, this is a fantastic read. It is so interesting. I mean, the entire storyline just keeps you moving, it keeps you going because you want to find out what happens to this character. Like I said, she's approaching her graduation date. She is wanting to be a companion because that is sort of like the top level within the society, and it's just about her trying to fight for that and trying to get there. All really for not a whole lot, because there's, even though the companionship is like the, you know, the big thing in this world and is sort of what you're supposed to strive for, very much like how women are, you know, supposed to kind of strive for marriage in our current day society. At the end of the day, for her and for in this world, that's not even like, it's not even like it's that great. It's not even like it's that big of an achievement, you know? At the end of the day, they still have to face awful stuff being a companion, and it's just so interesting, and you just fall so in love with this character, and it has so many different plot twists, and there are just things in this book that just completely like threw me off, and just, I was all over with the story. I could not put it down. I finished this so fast because it was so good, and I highly recommend that you guys read this. It is fantastic. I know that Louise O'Neill also has another novel that's kind of about rape culture a little bit, so I definitely want to read that one next. Because this is so good. And then very finally, a book that I read is called Red Queen, and this is by Victoria Aveyard. This is a book about a girl who lives in a society where people are divided by their blood. So we have red bloods and we have silver bloods. The silver bloods are the elite, they're the monarchy, they are just kind of the higher ups in this world, and then the red bloods are kind of like the trash, you know, they're the people that they send off to war to die, they're the people that have to do all the hard intensive labor, and what kind of separates them is the fact that silvers have these sort of special powers. So some of them can manipulate water, some of them can manipulate fire, some can read people's minds, some can control people. They have all these different things that sort of make them special, while the red bloods don't really have anything going for them. And this is about a girl who quickly discovers that she has some powers of her own and has to kind of go into hiding under the silver king and queen, because they don't want her to be exposed, because it's very much about power, and I think that there's a lot to do in here. It kind of reminds me a little bit of some like some things maybe about racism a little bit, but overall just how in the society, you know, they want the silvers to stay on top and they want the reds to stay on the bottom. And so when she kind of gets exposed, they want to, you know, try to manipulate the situation, try to control her, try to hide her. That's kind of like the synopsis of the story. You just kind of follow around this main character as she has to, you know, just go through all these different trials and all these different events and has to completely change her life because of this event. And I must say that I did really enjoy this book. I thought that it was a very interesting concept, a very unique concept. Some of the characters weren't as fleshed out as I maybe would have liked them to be. Some of them I thought were kind of useless, and you know, they were supposed to be big characters, but you really didn't learn a whole lot about them. You couldn't really get behind them. There is a little bit of a romance in here, but it really does not take center stage. Like, it's very much so in the background. There's times where it picks up a little bit, but to be honest, if you're somebody who likes young adult literature but you don't like, you know, how heavy the whole like lovey-dovey thing can be, then I think you'll like this, because this is really just about a girl's struggle for survival and about her identifying herself. And you know, there's a little bit of the romance, but it really does sort of take a back seat to the main plot of the story, which I think is kind of cool. But that is all. Those are all the books that I have read in the past couple of months. Like I said, it's not tons of books just because I've been so busy, but I have been doing really good at picking up my reading recently and just trying to find more time for it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this and you found this interesting. If you have any questions regarding these books, if you read any of these, please let me know what your thoughts are down below, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.